This is the CHGO Cubs podcast. My name is Brendan. Not joined with me is Corey, but we have Jared Willis filling in. Jared was at Wrigley Field this weekend talking to PCA, talking to the players in the clubhouse. We'll get all of his feedback from the crazy series that was against the St. Louis Cardinals. Cubs took 3 of 4 against the Cardinals. They are currently 6 games back, so momentum is building. They just made a few promotions from AA to AAA with James Triantos, Matt Shaw, Kevin Alcantara. We'll talk about that as well as the week that was with the Cubs. First, Jared, how are you feeling with the recent momentum? Are you feeling positive about the Cubs now that they took 3 of 4 against the Cardinals?
Yeah, I mean, it's you kind of have to, right? Like you take a team that is as far ahead of you in the division as the Cardinals are, a team that you need to get past in order to get one of those wild card spots. And they pretty much did exactly what you hoped for. They took 3 out of 4. You gained some ground. You're working your way back into this wild card conversation, which they, every time the Cubs feel like they've dropped out of the race, they go on a little run like this and they get themselves back into it. The question going forward is going to be, can they sustain this? Can they keep this going for a while? Because we've also seen the way that they'll make a little run and then they turn around and they might do like they did coming out of the All-Star break where, they dropped 2 series in a row. So the key is, let's keep this going. But yeah, you got to feel pretty good about how they looked against St. Louis. So I know we'll get into it later, but they're one fly ball from probably a 4-game sweep.
That's all it was. And that's kind of the story of the season where they feel so close from taking the next step. And then some nonsense happens, some event that is within their control happens, and they take a step backwards. The first question I want to ask you, though, beyond just the promotions, which we'll get into, you're in the clubhouse frequently. The question I always have as a fan is, can you notice, attitude or environmental shifts when teams are slumping or emerging out of a funk? Or from your perspective, is it typically status quo and you can't even tell what's going on?
It really is. It's status quo. If you walk into a clubhouse during pregame, it is very, very hard to tell. If I had to go in and had no idea how a team had been performing over the last week or 2 weeks, and I walk into a clubhouse during pregame, odds are it's going to be really difficult for me to tell, are they on a winning streak? Are they on a losing streak? And a lot of that is just, we hear the players say it all the time, but it's the nature of baseball where they kind of have to be that way, because if they start riding the highs too much and the lows too much, that will start to have a negative impact on these guys. So yeah, honestly, I go into both the Cubs and the White Sox clubhouses, and at least in the pregame,
which one has a better vibe?
White Sox, it's hard to call anything in there a vibe these days.
That's fair.
To be honest with you, even those guys, you walk in there during pregame and they don't carry themselves like, a team that's getting their butts kicked all the time. And so that, I think, is just that's just what they have to do. And so you don't notice it during the pregame, but there is for sure after a loss, after a tough loss, there is a pronounced difference in the demeanor of the clubhouse for sure.
From my perspective, when I watch the interviews on Marquee, I hear you talking to the players. Is what's displayed to the public and the fans typically what you pick up on as a reporter inside the clubhouse? Is the perceived narrative from a fan's perspective actually align with what you experience talking with the guys, if that makes sense? Or do you pick up on nuanced behaviors or tendencies that you interpret as meaningful?
Yeah, I think there are definitely some things that you see, whether it's stuff that I observe or just like interactions that I witness, that sometimes either don't really get reflected in sort of the general story of the team and the general story of the season, or at least get reflected in a way that I think maybe lacks a little context or needs more information. Going back a little while, there was a story that was starting to emerge that, like Craig Counsell doesn't care. He's not invested. He doesn't get fired
We
up.
heard that quite a bit. I mean, from
Yeah.
a majority of the Chicago local outlets were suggesting that.
Yeah. And that would be an example of something that I would say just isn't true to what I would see in the clubhouse, in pregame activity, and talking to Craig Counsell. So that's one example of something that I think, like, I get why you might be watching what's happening and watch like his demeanor during a game and think, oh man, this guy doesn't seem to care. But in those interactions, it's really easy to discover, like, oh, that's just not true. You're dealing with somebody whose personality maybe doesn't lend itself to, he's not going to pull a Lou Piniella and run out on the field and start kicking dirt and get himself tossed from a game.
Would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to see that? But he's just not the guy that's going to do it. Because one of the things that he told us when that that story was kind of starting to develop was, like, one of the things that players really keep an eye out for is anything that reeks of being like disingenuous.
Yeah.
So he's like, if I as a manager start acting that way, they're all going to know this isn't what Counsell's like. This isn't his personality, and they're going to sniff that out really fast. So that's, I think, one example of something where most of the time I think what you're seeing out there is pretty accurate, but every once in a while there's something where it's like, that we need more context here. This isn't quite the reality.
I feel as if when I watch the interviews, a lot of the players are pretty open. There's certain guys like Jameson Taillon who give you a lot of substance, and I learn about for Taillon's case, the attack strategy or what he's working on and what's working well. I even pick up on that with PCA. And PCA is a young guy, 21 years old. I know you and I wanted to talk about the prospects being promoted from AA, but let's start with PCA first. There was a lot of chatter with the fly ball with him and Nico that ultimately cost the Cubs Saturday's game. It may be a sweep of the series and would have put the Cubs 5 games back of the wild card within unrealistic maybe, but still striking distance and some realism per se. PCA at the end of Saturday's game and Nico more or less were in uniform, saying that it was Nico's ball and PCA was over aggressive. We heard the same thing that was said from Craig Counsell as well, that PCA was over aggressive and Nico should have had the ball. To preface, I think that was probably the end discussion, but rewatching that video, and again, I'm not a major league second baseman, but there has been times where I played second base growing up. There was a brief moment when that ball is hit that PCA is tracking it, and he takes his glove and he hits it on his hip. And PCA, if you watch him play frequently, that's his trigger. He's lining it up. But when he did that, in his periphery, Nico is bulldozing out into center field. Nico did the same thing on Sunday over in a shortstop territory to snag a pop-up. The difference, though, is that when Nico started to go to center field, PCA may not have felt convicted to call him off because he wasn't sure that Nico would vacate in time. Now, from Nico's perspective, you're taught always to go after the ball until the center field calls you off. But that's such a bang-bang play. You have a Gold Glove second baseman. You don't know if PCA, being the rookie, has the necessary authority to call off someone who's going forward to center field so fast. And there was a little bit of me that, although PCA did say that he should have defaulted to Nico, that ultimately it was kind of just a weird, mutually responsible play that more times than not never happened. But that being said, there needs to be some type of order of operations in place where a play like that doesn't happen. But it looked as if PCA took the blunt of it. They came to an agreement, manager, player, and it came down to Nico should have had the ball, and PCA was over aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, that was the story on Saturday for sure. And the way that Nico described it was, as a second baseman, I'm going after that ball until I hear something otherwise. Because he, of course, can't see what's happening with PCA. So he's relying on like hearing that verbal, you got to call him off that ball. So he's just going to keep going for it. And there was a little bit of like in PCA's case where he probably should have called him off a little sooner, like make that decision a split second sooner.
Yep.
But you do kind of have to wonder just about the dynamic as a rookie versus a veteran Gold Glover like Horner. Are you somewhere in the back of your mind is PCA thinking like deferring to Horner, trying to get that ball, and he realizes a moment too late that he probably should be the one to go after it?
It's a bang play. I mean, it's happening within half a second.
And so, and like Horner said afterwards, he's like, we could have that play 100 times, and one of us is making that catch 99 of them. So
exactly,
this was just the one time when it just didn't work out. As a general rule, I think we all know that the outfielder is supposed to take charge, and the outfielder is supposed to like call the infielder off the ball because they have a better vantage point of like what's happening. They can see it in front of them. They are coming into the ball as opposed to trying to range out to go get it. And so like technically it's PCA's job to call Nico off. And like I said, probably should have done it a moment sooner so that he can take that extra step to get in to get that ball. Cause like we saw, the ball missed his glove by an inch and a half.
Yeah.
So again, though, I think just one of those things that like you said, bang play. It's a little bit fluky. There's probably multiple dynamics there at play, but it kind of fell to where it was like, this was Nico, or I'm sorry, not Nico, but this was Pete Crow Armstrong. He's kind of the one who's takes the responsibility for the play. Because whatever percentage of it ultimately is like his fault, I guess, so to speak. So fair or not, that's just the reality.
There's, for fans who don't follow the Cubs, they look at PCA's antics, if you want to call it antics, as maybe arrogance. I see it differently. I know most Cub fans see it very differently. Teammates love PCA. Coaches speak very highly of him. PCA is someone who's played, U.S. baseball, has been at the top of his game, top of his class. Even as like a 12, 13-year-old, he's been among the best players growing up his entire life. He has that professionalism, that attitude. But when I hear him talk to you in the media, it reinforces that. I'm impressed by how he carries himself. I'm impressed with the immaturity and even his ability to stand in front of you guys and take the questions. How have you seen PCA react to questions from you guys in both good and bad times so far in his young career?
Yeah, I think like Saturday evening was a really good example of that because he's had the opportunities to talk to us when he does something good or when things are going well. But as any baseball player learns, like that's going to go both ways, where we're going to come talk to you when you hit the game-winning home run. When you're Mike Tauchman and you hit the walk-off on Thursday night, everyone's gathered at your locker. But we're also going to come gather at your locker when you make a bad play in the field, or you're the relief pitcher who has an inning that just unravels. Like, you also are going to talk to us in those situations. And PCA, he was there. He came and stood at his locker. And like anybody who's seen the interview, he clearly was not happy, not necessarily like unhappy to be speaking to us. I think still processing the situation and how it all.
I mean, his adrenaline looked like it was just.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there have been a handful of times when you're talking to a guy in post game where I'm honestly like, man, should we give this guy a minute? But nature of the job, that's just how it goes. But he clearly was still like,
he was fuming.
Upset. He was, for sure. Yeah. But he stood there. He answered all of our questions. He did not try to cut the interview short. He didn't try to shut us down or anything like that. So we've had players do that before, where they will just decide, okay, I'm done. He would have stood there and answered questions as long as we kept asking. So he faced it like a veteran in some ways. And I think that's the kind of thing too, that speaking of like clubhouse culture, other players notice that, they see that. And so when the rookie makes a mistake and has to face the media and they watch him handle it the way that he did, they all take note, because if he tries to duck us, if he whatever, somebody's going to be in his ear saying, no, you don't get to just go talk to the media when you're doing well. You got to face them when stuff like this happens. So
Yeah.
he handled it the way he was supposed to.
He was also asked when Mike Tauchman hit his walk-off about being pinched hit. I do want to get your thoughts on that. Let's take a break, come back, and get your thoughts on the Mike Tauchman walk-off and how he was pinched hit for PCA. First break here is from Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. I've used Game Time many times to go to games both in California and at Wrigley Field, and I know that my purchase is guaranteed. If I have any questions, I know I can also call the wonderful staff at Game Time right away, and they can address all the questions that I have. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code CHGO for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code CHGO for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Penrose Brewing, Geneva, Illinois. Seltz Up, hard seltzers with real fruit, led by Lemon Seltz Up, a national gold medal winning hard seltzer with real lemons. They created our unique twist on a lemon shake-up with the house-made hard seltzer and pureed lemons for a throwback to warm weather and county fairs. Also available is Lemon Tea Up, a half-and-half inspired hard seltzer. Just released this year is also the Transfusion Seltz Up, inspired by a popular golf cocktail with grape, ginger, and lime. Penrose is available at your local beverage retailer, or visit Penrose's taproom in Geneva. For more information, go to penrosebrewing.com or follow them on social media at Penrose Brewing. Okay, back to PCA. Mike Tauchman performed very well this weekend. We had a walk-off, obviously. We had a home run Sunday. PCA is also starting to show signs of offense. It's been a rough go most of the time in his rookie season, but recently, within the last week, in his last 29 plate appearances, 9 hits, only 3 strikeouts. That is, for me, the biggest change of events is the lower strikeouts now getting hard contact to go with that trend. Question I want to bring up is, with the Cubs now on the periphery of a playoff hunt, maybe not realistic they can get back into it, but still it is a possibility. Do you see Craig Counsell maybe putting Tauchman more in center field, getting his bat in the lineup more? He can't DH right now because we have Bellinger's finger issue and problems throwing the baseball. Do you see Tauchman getting more playing time in substitution for PCA's at-bats?
Yeah, I mean, PCA has made that more difficult of late, because he's starting to hit the ball pretty well. Even in instances where the results aren't there and you see him like hitting the ball really hard, but just it, right into somebody's glove, whatever, that sort of thing. Had you asked me that question a week or so ago, I would have said, yeah, I think you keep Tauchman in center field, use PCA as maybe the defensive replacement late in the game. But now, when I think my opinion is if PCA's bat is starting to heat up, you go with that. I know that's tough because Tauchman is such a good at bat. He seems to be pretty clutch. That all of that is hard to just set aside. But given the defense that PCA gives you, given the fact that like he's starting to hit the ball really well, I think you have to stick with that. Now, I don't know. We saw that like Ian Happ was a late scratch today. My guess is he had that. He attempted to make that catch on Saturday and slammed into the wall.
I can't believe he stayed in the game after that. Like I haven't seen an outfielder run into the wall that hard since like Sam Folt.
he hit it hard. And so I was honestly surprised to see him in the lineup when the lineup first came out. So then when it turned out he was a light scratch, I thought, okay, there it is, because the guy's got to be sore. So
Yeah.
you do wonder, does that buy you a game or two? Maybe council decides on Monday, like, let me give Hap another day, put Tauchman in left. But that's a really short-term solution to this good problem to have of, in a way, you kind of have 4 outfield bats that you'd like to get in the lineup, or really 5, that you'd like to get into the lineup. And it's hard to know how to do that. But ultimately, I land on, if PCA's bat's starting to heat up, you keep him out there.
The numbers with PCA, just to put it into perspective, and it's a reason why I'm more encouraged, is specifically the contact or the lack of whiffs. If you look at just how his trajectory has gone with whiffing this year, when he debuted early on in May, and up until he was sent back down to AAA, he was only swinging and missing at a 12% rate, which is reflected on that teal colored line right here. Got called back up to Major League Baseball, and that swinging strike rate rose up to 20%. But since the beginning of July, it's gone back down to just around 12%. That's the league average. To put that into context, we have Nico Horner, who is below 5%. Nico Horner is consistently hovering around the 90 to 95th percentile of contact. PCA was not even making this much contact in the minor leagues. So he's making adjustments at the big league level and making contact at rates better than what we saw in AAA. Now, the encouraging trend with this as well is we're also seeing not just contact, but also hard contact, the hardest contact he's shown in his young career. Now, with the elevated contact, his overall exit velo is around Nico Horner's exit velocity now. Before he was sent back down, it was around 82 miles per hour of exit velo. Now it's around 86. This is the best stretch we've seen from PCA, arguably, in his entire career. That's why I think, to your point, playing him with that defensive ceiling is obviously tantalizing for Craig. But now if you contrast what Tauchman can provide offensively and the sacrifice you make defensively, well, maybe it's not as easy of a decision to make anymore, because now you're starting to see PCA maybe at least provide close to league average offense. And that's where kind of Tauchman's hung out around in the past year and a half with the Cubs. And his bat might be best served as a late inning pinch hit selective matchup that Craig can use. And it's what he did use to win a game against the Cardinals.
Yeah, I agree. I think for now, at least, given the way that things are going, that's the best way to do it. Because they are in this stretch where they really have to, they have to try to maximize every game, almost like every at bat, because you sort of created this hole, you dug this hole for yourself in May, June, and a good chunk of July. So now this is the reality. And so, does Mike Tauchman probably deserve to start every day under normal circumstances? Yeah, but I think if like you said, if PCA is starting to hit at league average, given the upgrade on defense that he is, that's the bat that I like to keep in the lineup. And we haven't even mentioned like what PCA does on the base paths. When he gets on base, the threat that he poses there, the stolen base ability, the extra base ability. I saw him hit that triple on Saturday, which for a lot of players, maybe that's a stand-up double, but he got to third base pretty easily, ultimately ended up scoring. That's stuff that you keep that in the lineup if you can.
Maybe you don't have the answer to this, but I'm curious. Dustin Kelly, do you see Dustin in the clubhouse or anywhere like within Wrigley? Do you know or have any type of idea of maybe not the specifics, but the generality of his work routine with someone like PCA or just any of these players in general?
We do see Dustin Kelly a lot. We actually talked to him for quite a while on Sunday.
Okay.
And what's funny is had the whole play with PCA not happened, I was playing what I would have written on Saturday would have had a lot to that would have come from our talk with Dustin Kelly. So it's
perfect.
funny you asked that, because
there you go.
He's around. But one of the things that I think teams do is some of that work, like the one-on-one work between a hitting coach and a player, no one sees that. I think that's done in batting cages, that's back in the clubhouse, that's close to media, or there's conversations that are happening at the batting cages during pregame BP that, nobody, that's away from anybody else's ears, that kind of stuff, for a variety of reasons. It's the same thing as like, if you ask a player about like, hey, why do you hit such and such pitcher so well? They're almost never going to give you an on the record answer, because they don't want that pitcher to know.
Do they give you off the record answers ever?
Yeah, they'll tell you some stuff sometimes if you just ask them one-on-one, but even then, every once in a while they don't. I've asked guys about like batting stance changes and stuff.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Oh yeah, but a lot of times they'll just give me a look like, no, okay, come on, I'm not,
not talking to you about this.
I'm not putting that out there. So you got to try. You got to ask.
Yeah,
but,
I would try for sure.
But yeah, so Dustin Kelly he's around for sure. But I wish it was easier to see some of that one-on-one work, to be able to speak to what it's like. But at the same time, I get why they keep that under wraps.
Is there anything that you picked up with Dustin Kelly? Are you saving this for a story for CHGO in the not so distant future?
Yeah, there's some stuff he said that I'm sitting on. I'm working on a story on a certain Cubs rookie first baseman that I'm hoping to put out closer to the end of the season. I've been kind of slowly gathering stuff on that. So he shared some things on him, which I thought were pretty cool. But he did talk to us about like Dansby and part of why Dansby has done so well lately, and talked about like trying to use the middle of the field more.
Which you saw on Sunday, hit to the right side of the field, up the middle. Yep.
Yeah. And I think one or two of his hits on Saturday, but then also that ninth inning hit on Thursday that contributed to the walk-off was, that one was down the line, I think. But yeah, he talked about with Dansby, like getting him to work up a little bit more. With the Miguel Amaya, he said that they've made some tweaks where they're shortening up his stride, kind of going back to a batting stance that he used at a different point in his career. So definitely some stuff where he's like, there's like granular things that they are working on, that he's looking at what guys are doing, because he talked about like the big question for the Cubs has been what's happened to the offense this year, because it's mostly the same guys as 2023 who didn't have this much trouble scoring. Why is it that the same group is having such a harder time now? So yeah, it's very clear that that's something that they have been working really hard to figure out all season long.
I do want to talk to you about Amaya. Let's take an ad break here, come back and talk about Amaya, Ballesteros. Again, the AA promotions that we heard late Sunday night. Break here from Illinois Pork. It's grilling season. Get your pork. People who are active need more protein than the average American. In fact, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, Dietitians of Canada, and the American College of Sports Medicine recommend 1.2 to 2.0 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for athletes, depending on their training. The International Society of Sports Nutrition also recommends that people who are involved in a general fitness program or interested in optimizing their health eat low-fat, high-quality sources of protein, which include lean cuts of pork. Elevate your protein game with lean pork, a powerhouse of natural goodness. Savor the flavor, savor the gains, and celebrate any occasion by enjoying the best pork produced by Illinois' pig farmers. From your sausage and bacon for breakfast to pulled pork or juicy chops right off the grill, is an entire season dedicated to pork and the people behind the product, paid for by the Illinois pork producers. Generations of commitments. Upcoming, we have the CHGO Golf Tournament. Jared, join CHGO at Cog Hill #2 on August 23rd for our second annual kickoff classic. It's presented by Circus Sports Illinois, Coors Light, Shady Rays, and Seltzup. You can sign up as an individual, a twosome, a foursome. The package includes 18 holes and a cart. You don't like walking? you get a cart. There's also tee gifts for every player and a limited edition CHGO pins and aces golf polo is also available for purchase. You can hang out with a lot of the CHGO personalities. I don't know, Jared, if you're a golfer, you look like you could hit a golf ball pretty far. I'm not going to lie. I got a baseball swing. I slice everything. I look like Nico Horner hitting a double in the right field gap.
I'm right there with you. That's my problem. It's like Slice City.
It's awful.
I always say, like, I know in theory how I'm supposed to hit the ball. Like, I could probably teach somebody a golf swing, but I cannot get my body to do it. My hands always open up. The club face gets opened up, and then the ball's just it's all over the place. So,
I blame baseball for my golf struggles.
Yep.
That's what I go with. So I don't know what your issues are, but maybe you can blame baseball as well. I don't know.
Baseball and just a general lack of athleticism. So,
well, I'm not going to say that for myself. I'm not going to throw myself under the bus like that. But again, that is on August 23rd. So if you want to go show off your golf game and look better than Jared and I golfing, then go ahead and sign up. Okay. So a lot of shatter tonight. We have Miguel Amaya struggling, but nevertheless hit a home run and a base hit in Sunday's game. We have Moises Ballesteros performing very well in AAA. We also have James Triantos, Kevin Alcantara, and Matt Shaw getting promoted to AAA. So right now, the AAA roster is stacked. We have Matt Shaw, Triantos, Alcantara, Owen Casey, Moises Ballesteros, and when he returns from injury, Cade Horton. For all intents and purposes, we have the best Cubs prospects at the very closest level to Major League Baseball. We've had 4 years of slogging through certain stretches, talking about these prospects. A lot of them were lower level guys. That was always the caveat talking about the system. None of that is real these days. The Cubs' best prospects are a phone call away and a bus ride away from Wrigley Field. So before we talk about Triantos and those guys, I have seen some discourse about should the Cubs call up Ballesteros now, even though he's not maybe the most competent catcher, still learning the position. But the response from people who critique Ballesteros' catching ability is, well, Amai's putting up some of the worst defensive numbers himself. They don't have a competent backup or one that's familiar with the pitching staff in Christian Betancourt. We have Thomas Nido, who just had, I believe, meniscus surgery. He's out for 6 weeks. Why not call up Ballesteros, slowly integrate him in, let him play maybe once every 3 days, even though it's not daily at bats, but give the Cubs another bat off that bench and the ability to slot him in and grow defensively?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that idea makes a lot of sense. Because all season long, the production from the catching position for the Cubs has been among the worst in the league. And like you pointed out, the defensive downgrade from Amaya to Ballesteros isn't so dramatic that I would say, oh, well, hold on a minute, let's keep Amaya there because he's going to do so much more for you defensively. It's kind of that question with Ballesteros of like, is what he's going to provide at the plate going to outweigh whatever drawbacks you might get from like his game calling, his framing, some of that kind of stuff. And given the difficulty the Cubs have had scoring, I would kind of lean toward, if you've got somebody who you think is going to provide some offense for you in the minors, then I say you give him a shot. I would, I'm with the commenter who said, maybe let him acclimate to AAA for a little bit longer. We don't necessarily need to rush it. But yeah, Edward, I'm with you. I would say another couple weeks at AAA, but that's really a conversation that probably needs to happen. Like, is this bat worth kind of taking a chance on him come mid to late August and start thinking about like we could add a spark to our offense at a position that has really been a challenge for us all year.
I always get pushback on this, which I understand. It's not the right way to go about this, but I always try to push the boundaries and maybe promote some breakage, if you will. Cubs are 6 games back. If they proceed as they've played, they're going to miss the playoffs. No doubt about that.
Right.
Now, the question is, can Ballesteros promote his development, get his back going, and put himself in a position where he becomes a stable contributor in 2025? For me, the best way to do that is to let him fail as fast as possible. So, for example, with PCA, called up last September, awful in that short stretch. He returns in spring training of 2024 with a slight mechanical change that allowed him to get to the baseball faster. Contact rate went up, but it was that breakage point in September of 2023 that kind of prompted that change. With Ballesteros, I would like to do that now. Don't wait till September, but if he does break, which is not even a guarantee given his profile, well, then you start that fail process and that adjustment process now. That way, in July of 2025, he's already going through that adjustment period, whereas PCA is still going through that, and we're in mid-August. I want to get it going fast right now. At the same time, it is a little bit different than PCA's discussion last season because the Cubs' offensive output at catcher is, like you said, among the worst. And Ballesteros, his profile is one of those unique unicorn profiles. In AAA, he's striking out better than league average. He's batting almost 300 at a 280 batting average, 5 home runs and 134 plate appearances. His WOBA is lower than maybe what you would expect for a AAA guy with a 346, but he's 20 years old. He's shown this rapid ability to play above his age. So I look at it two different ways. One, I want to promote his developments, and I can't really convince myself that an extra 2, 3, 4 weeks in AAA is such a necessary way to develop him. And two, I want the Cubs to have a better bat in the lineup. I can't convince myself that having Miguel Amaya take high leverage at bats is undeniably the best decision. So because there's some gray area there, I'm going to take the more extreme option. I always will do that. And I will push Ballesteros to the edge. It is very difficult for a 20-year-old to handle, but I think it gives the Cubs the best chance, even though it's not a strong chance, but still the best chance to winning games now. But also, I think it gives the Cubs a better chance to win games in July of 2025, because then they can start going through that iteration process as fast as possible.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom there, because we tend to maybe, I don't know if underestimate is the right word, but discount perhaps like what it does for a player. PCA is a good example of this. When they get that look in late in one season and they struggle, and then they get the opportunity over the off season, the winter, in spring training to work on, they hopefully first identify, okay, here's what made Major League pitching so challenging for me. What do I need to do? And then spend that time doing it. And then early part of the season, you're making some of those adjustments so that, like we talked about earlier, you're starting to see PCA kind of coming around at the plate now. And maybe Ballesteros, this would be a good opportunity for him. So like I said earlier, I'm kind of on the camp of maybe give him another couple weeks, but who knows? Why not?
Yeah.
I call him up sooner and just get that process started. Because unless if the Cubs continue on the pace that.
Looks like we have Jared's laptop battery dying. That's totally fine. So this is what we're going to do. So we have right now major news with the promotions in AA. We have James Triantos being promoted. We have Matt Shaw being promoted. We have Kevin Alcantara being promoted. Right now, Matt Shaw is batting .279, has an 18% strikeout rate in AA, a 12% walk rate, 14 homers, 386 weighted on base average. James Triantos batting almost 300, a 298 batting average, a 10% strikeout rate, a 5% walk rate, 7 home runs, a 356 weighted on base average. Triantos, that ability for him to not strike out that much, a sub 10% strikeout rates, and the ability to have that be with a high batting average is very unique. And his physical maturity you've seen grow over the past 2 years. The question with Triantos is, can he actually play a competent defensive position? We've seen that be a challenge for the Cubs over the past few seasons, finding a position for Christopher Morel. The ability for him to get familiar with third base was too slow. It prompted a trade for Isaac Paredes. And then we've seen that even dating back to someone like Ian Happ, who was used at second base, even got some time at third base, first base, played center field. But he himself said when his offense stabilized for the first time, he believed it was in part due to consistency playing in left field. That will be the question with James Triantos. Can the Cubs find a position for him in an expedient amount of time during a competitive window? The challenge is you have Nico Horner locked up at second base, and you just traded for Isaac Paredes. So where are you going to play Triantos? It seems very, very difficult to find a position for him. That seems almost inevitable to be used as a trade. We have Jared back here, back from the dead.
We're back.
Battery is back to life.
I overestimated my laptop's
Dude, I've
battery
done that
capacity
so many times. I've been doing these shows with Corey for a long time, and Corey will just go on and on and on. I'm like, Corey, stop talking over here. I got to go get up and plug my charger. And so I take the blame for that. But we're talking about, when I say we're talking, I was talking to myself on this computer screen about James Triantos, Matt Shaw, and Kevin Alcantara. The challenge that I was talking about is finding a position for James Triantos, who's at AAA. But with him, you have third base and second base as his primary positions currently, but you have Nico Horner at second base and Isaac Paredes locked up at third base. So how they find room for him seems almost impossible.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge for both Triantos and Shaw, right? Like, you've got these guys that are exciting prospects. They're getting moved up to AAA, but there's significant roadblocks to getting them into the majors and getting them like a real opportunity at playing time. We saw that a little bit with Luis Vasquez earlier in the season. It's kind of different circumstances, but it's tough when you've got a guy like Triantos or Shaw where you want to see them in the majors, but then the problem is like, okay, whose at bats are you going to take away? I don't think it's too early with Isaac Paredes to say, let's sacrifice some of his at bats. I don't think anybody really wants to take Nico Horner off the field. So what do you do?
Some people want to take Nico off the field.
That's true. But no, I think that's the one reason with those guys in particular why I'm excited that they're up to AAA and they're as close as they are. But it could be that Ballesteros is the one who has a much easier path to getting a look at the majors, like we were talking about before my computer battery conked out on me. But for those other guys, it could be it's a slower path, and fans might get frustrated. But again, I would say realistically, like, whose at bats are you going to take away?
And then you have the same problem with Matt Shaw, second base, third base, overlapping positions with two of the guys locked up on this major league roster, and you're competing with a mutual fellow AAAer right next to you. It's a difficult challenge that Jed's front office has to figure out this offseason. And ultimately, it could define the future of this front office. I don't believe we'll see Matt Shaw or James Triantos called up this season. I think it will be more of an off-season discussion to figure out their roles and their value. I also believe the same for Kevin Alcantara. I think he finishes in AAA, and they mix at-bats in for Tauchman, as we talked about, and PCA. Those three guys will be more of an offseason discussion. And quite frankly, I'd be surprised if we see Owen Casey called up. And I believe Ballesteros probably does have the best chance, just given that catcher's void. But it's going to be fascinating how they figure this all out. In a perfect world, 40-man decisions be damned, and you have more flexibility. I'd like all of them to be called up in September. But you don't get that luxury anymore. And I think if there's one guy of those five to be called up, it probably is Ballesteros. But could you see Owen Casey even getting a chance? He's been at AAA all season.
Yeah, I mean, he might have a better shot because he has been in AAA for longer.
Yeah.
But again, it's kind of like going back to what we were talking about earlier with your outfielders. We're already kind of, it's hard to, do you start PCA, Tauchman, and all of those kinds of questions? You add another guy into the mix, then it complicates that even further. And I think most people would agree, if I'm going to call up a prospect and bring them up to the majors, I want to be able to give them, especially a prospect with a profile that like Owen Casey has, I want him to get a chance to face major league pitching to some, significant degree so that we can assess how he does against it. He can assess, and like we were talking about earlier, spend some time in the off season and work on what he needs to work on. So the last thing I'd want to see is really any of these guys, but especially someone like Owen Casey get called up. And it's like, okay, well, there's nowhere to put him. We can't get him in the lineup on a regular basis. And maybe he's only getting to pinch hit late in games when he's facing, really tough relief pitching and some of that kind of thing, which is sort of what PCA ran into last September too. So do you want to do that to Owen Casey? I don't know if I would. It's a cliche that it's a good problem to have, and it is, but at the same time, it's
you got to fix the problem.
You got to figure this out somehow.
Yeah.
And, everybody hates it when they trade their prospects too. So what do you do? We'll see.
With the last 15 minutes here, the Cubs are 6 games back. I keep alluding to this. It's likely they missed the playoffs right now. That's just how it's going to work. But they have an 8% chance at winning the wild card. So to put that into context, you have an 8% chance of winning a baseball game if you're down 3 runs entering the 7th inning. Okay. So right now the Cubs are down 3 runs and they're entering the 7th inning. You can imagine a huge implosion in 1 inning and you come back, you take the lead and you win the game. It's not that far-fetched. In your opinion and your outlook covering this team so far this season, how do you see the Cubs coming back down 3 runs in 7th inning and making the playoffs? Do you think it's actually a worst case scenario than that type of analogy?
So, man, I don't know if I'm going to make people happy with my answer here.
You got to tell the truth, Jared. Don't sugarcoat it. You hate the Cubs. We all get it.
Yeah, right. I would say maybe you take what the Cardinals did on Saturday, and I think that's perhaps a good illustration of what would need to happen. On one side of it, you have to keep performing well, right? Like the Cubs have to keep winning games, but at the same time, at this point in the season, they are depending on somebody else has to start to collapse. Like the Cubs have to improve their pace, but they also need other teams to not continue at the pace that they've been going on, because then we just end the season right where they are right now. So in the same way that, you have on Saturday in the 8th inning where Isaac Paredes tries to make a throw on a play that he probably should have just kept it in his glove. You have, like we dissected earlier, the ball that drops in between Nico Horner and Pete Crow Armstrong. You need the equivalent of that with one of the other teams, or not one, a couple of the other teams that are ahead of them, which can happen. It does happen, but you need a little bit of an implosion from some of those teams, while at the same time the Cubs are continuing to play better than what they have done for most of the season. So do I think that's possible? Yeah, for sure. If anything, from watching and covering baseball for years, I've learned is that, that kind of thing is always possible. Is it likely? No, I don't think so, just because I don't know if I want to bank on other teams collapsing. I think the Cubs can play well, but it's probably going to come down to, it's too little too late. And so, everybody can flame me for being a hater now, but they're going to be doing
that for sure. No doubt about that. There's negativity in 2 facets. I hear fans say, oh, they're not going to come back and make the playoffs because their bullpen is still unpredictable. That's one side of the discussion. The other side is, even if the bullpen does emerge and stabilize, which it has done, funny enough, in the past 6 weeks, the offense is not showing strong enough signs to inspire long-term confidence. Where do you fall on that side of the argument? Is your negativity, if you want to call it that, I would say you're more realist, but is your realism grounded in concerns with the bullpen or more so with the offense, or is it really just the entire picture as a whole?
Yeah, I think it comes down to those two things, but of the two, I worry a little bit less about the bullpen, and
Which is
my
weird
bigger
to say given like
it
all
is
the
weird,
injuries that we've seen in the
right?
regression.
Which I think speaks to like how frustrating the offense has been,
Yeah.
um, because they they have yet to really have a sustained period where it looks like, okay, they're back, they're starting to hit the way that we know that they can or believe that they can. And so that's the thing, that unless like that offense really starts to click over the next few weeks, I don't know that they're going to be able to do it, because you put you put a lot of pressure on your pitching staff otherwise, and that's where things start to, like, the margin for error gets really really small. Because even in Saturday's game, yeah, you had a 3-run lead, but we all see how quickly something like that can go away, just thanks to a couple of bad plays. And you got to widen that margin as much as you can, and they just don't usually do that.
For me, when I start thinking about ways they can make this a playoff chase, it's Seiya Suzuki, Cody Bellinger, and then elevated performances from Dansby Swanson, and then to be expected offensive numbers from Nico Horner, Isaac Paredes, and right now even Michael Busch. The way they did this last year was having Cody Bellinger and Seiya Suzuki be 400 weighted on base average plus guys, slugging, lots of base hits, taking their walks. Seiya's doing that right now. Since the All-Star break, he has over a 400 weighted on base average, a 163 WRC plus, batting almost 300 and taking his walks and looking aggressive in accounts that deserve aggression. On the other hand, although Cody Bellinger has had a productive week, the finger injury is still causing some reason for concern. And even before he broke that finger, the offense wasn't quite there from the power department. If Cody Bellinger doesn't have that similar second half last season, then it demands better performances than what we saw from even last year's whole Dansby Swanson. Or it requires Michael Busch to continue hitting like this, or it requires Isaac Paredes to be that 90th percentile offensive guy. That's all very possible, but it points to just the unlikelihood of that happening. But we've seen crazier things. There was a season not too long ago where Frank Schwindel put up one of the best second halves in Major League Baseball in 200 plate appearances. So this stuff tends to play out in unpredictable ways. I can see scenarios where the offense does find it, and it does so in ways that we never expected. And I can see just a lot of the funk continue. And likewise, I can see the bullpen imploding and more injuries happening and guys fatiguing out just like last year. But at the same time, I can see Porter Hodge stabilizing, continuing to look good, Tyson Miller continuing to look good, and Hector Neris, for all the heart attacks he's given, has actually looked better recently. I know he gave up that lead off that Ian Happ collision in the wall, but he's looked better. Baseball is weird. If there's one thing I've learned, like you, is expect the complete opposite of what you think is going to happen. That's what I've always tend to learn. And last season, I did not expect the Cubs bullpen to fade in the fashion it faded when September hits, and maybe this year's different.
Yeah, maybe it's the opposite, and the bullpen holds, and their offense starts to click, and they're this
I thought you were going to go the other way. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the bullpen holds, their offense just tanks again.
Or yeah, right. Who knows? But no, you're right. It's just like who going into last season would have said the World Series is going to be the Rangers versus the Diamondbacks. Nobody was predicting that. And what was it, 2018, when the Brewers, like, they got super hot, but it didn't really start until almost September.
Yeah, and I think
they just went nuts.
I remember talking to this with Corey, and I'm like, oh, there's no way the Cubs lose this division. They're like 5.5 games up. Yeah. They would have to like basically lose either all these games from Milwaukee to win every single game. And it was Milwaukee winning like almost every single game.
Yeah. they just didn't lose at all. I'll have to go back and look at what their record was that September.
Whenever that stuff happens, I just black it out. I never go back to that in my memory. That's it. I never think about it ever again.
Right. Like it didn't even happen. But so stuff like that does happen. And, we remember when it doesn't go the Cubs' way, but then there's you could probably look at like the 2015 season as a good example of when it did go the Cubs' way. They were red hot in the second half because that's when Arrieta really took off. They get in the wild card, but they were, what were the Cardinals had 100 wins that year.
Yeah.
Nobody in St. Louis was probably expecting that the Cubs of all teams were going to knock them out in the division series.
And they sure did.
So,
sure did.
It happens. And sometimes, it goes your team's way. That's for sure.
There was one comment, I know you tweeted about it, when they were interviewing Tommy Pham during the game. And I hate those player interviews during the game. They like distracted Tommy Pham, which would have been a good thing for the Cubs. But he was talking about clutchness. And it's like, I've been playing at Wrigley Field in like the clutch gene, I think does exist. They had Kyle Schwarber.
Schwarber was the first name you mentioned.
I'm thinking to myself, like, why is he mentioning Schwarber? I'm like, oh yeah, he was on the team in 2015 when Schwarber hit that home run in Game 4. So it brought back good memories for a brief second there.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense why that was the first name that came to mind as he's standing in the Wrigley Field outfield.
Right.
Probably thinking about watching that ball sail over his head.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, so we'll end it there, Jared. So thank you for filling in. I always say this when we have you on. It reminds me you were our first guest. We say this every single time, but it's like nostalgic to say. When Corey and I were doing Cubs related, 10 years ago, you were the very first guest to come on. I had no gray hairs. You had less gray hair maybe back then. So we've aged, but I think we've aged gracefully. Now you find yourself in the Wrigley Field clubhouse, and I'm still in my apartment doing this podcast. But we thank you for coming on. Do you want to plug any of your stories coming up? I know you had a few stories this weekend, but what else do you have coming up through the ranks?
Yeah, I'll be so this coming weekend I'll be there for both of the crosstown games. I'll be focusing on the Cubs side of things because Vinny Duber, our White Sox writer, he'll be on the south side beat. So your Cubs stories, I'll have those from those nights, and maybe by then the White Sox will have won a game and broken their streak. But we'll see.
They lost 20 in a row. Is that what it is?
20 in a row as of today. So there's three. They're three off of the record.
There's like a few ways of looking at this. Like, of course, they would break or stop that losing streak against the Cubs. Like, it's just like that's just how the season's going.
Right. So. It's almost like you root for them to break that streak in Oakland. That's who they're headed to Oakland to play the A's right now.
Yeah.
So you hope it happens then, so that it doesn't happen against the Cubs Friday or Saturday. But yeah, I'll be there for both of those. And then, like I said earlier in the show, I've got some other like longer stuff that I'm working on that'll come out, closer to the end of the season.
All right, we'll be looking forward to that. Corey will be back next Sunday for all you Corey lovers out there. I know you're disappointed, but we do have Jared pinch hitting. Is always a good pinch hitter. He's the Mike Tauchman of our podcast. Let's put it that way. Look at that. Are you from Palatine or no?
No, but you know what? Okay. I've been to Palatine many times. So
okay, well there we go. That's look at all the overlap right there. We'll have Luke, Ryan, Cody back with you guys Monday. Cubs start a 3-game set against Minnesota. They go and finish the White Sox crosstown series at the end of this week. Again, the Cubs are 6 games back. They've won 3 of 4 against the Cardinals, 4 of their last 5. Some momentum building. Keep it going. Maybe by the time we talk with you next week, they're 3 games back of the wild card optimistically. You never know. Baseball is a stupid sport. Never expect what you're expecting. And we'll go from there. Thank you guys for listening. And as always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.